Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Sunday Sit Down. I'm Reverend Phil Dieke, one of the pastors on staff here at White Rock. And this morning, I'm going to dive right in because I'm just really excited for our guest this morning. If you've been here, you know that we do this as kind of a warm-up for worship. And we're starting on a whole new series this week. And by this week, it's really this year. We're going to, for the next almost full year, be in this series called Unfold. And part of Unfold is really going to be examining the idea of the power of story. And so we're really excited to have for the first week, our guest on the Sunday Sit Down is an Emmy Award winner. So Gabrielle, will you introduce yourself and let us know where you're coming from and where you're joining us from this today?
I will, and thanks so much for having me. I'm really psyched to be here. I'm a political affairs reporter, which is a fancy word for a person that follows national politics in Washington. And so I make documentaries. I've made them for PBS for the last 5 years. I've focused a lot on the White House, Congress, the intelligence community, and before PBS and a show called Frontline, which I really adore, I was a producer at 60 Minutes, where I also focused on kind of investigative pieces around Washington. So I did a big story years ago on the Stock Act, which was a law that prohibited members of Congress from trading on non-public information that they got at congressional hearings, and we did a big story about it, and people were pretty outraged, and it became illegal to do that. So we still hear about it happening every once in a while. And my mom texts me.
I'm applauding you, right? Like that's a good one.
Yeah, ethical lessons. Yeah, my mom will text me and say like, "Wait, I thought they couldn't do this anymore." You know, it turns out like some of them still try, but yeah, that's sort of
not to throw names out, but I think Rand Paul was in the news lately, so that's okay. We won't go down that path, but no, that's awesome. I'm a big PBS fan, support our local station, love it so much. Just think it's one of the gifts that we still have in our society today, so love that. So but currently you're in Boston though, right?
I am. So thanks to viewers like you, I have been able to be employed for the last 5 years to keep my eye on Washington. I'm now though taking a step back. I'm doing a fellowship for journalists here at Harvard, and I am spending the year kind of understanding how producers, reporters can instill trust and credibility in our reporting, because I think we can all agree that we're reading what we want to read. We're not talking to folks who disagree with us, and that is a great disservice to all of us. But I also feel really responsible as a political reporter to try and think of ways to bridge those divides with stories that I kind of come up with. So yeah, I'm stressed out about things just as everyone else is.
Sure. What an important word though when you said trust, and I'll let that kind of segue us into our conversation on this idea of story, because there's a whole lot of stories that are circulating out there, and you, as a reporter, have the ability to tell all kinds of stories. And one of the things that I really want to investigate with us here is, how do you get into the process of what is the story you are going to tell? And clearly, you're not just reporting facts, because we'll all fall asleep if all you're doing is reporting facts. So what's that process of like, how do I take something and how do I dive into it and really turn it into a story that's going to be compelling for the viewer, for the listener?
Yeah, so it's all about characters. I hate to use that word because it sounds kind of disparaging sometimes, but it's all about, frankly, personalizing the story, figuring out who are the decision makers, who are the folks inflicting change or decisions or certain policies, who are the power players, and most importantly, are they changing? If they're not changing, it's not interesting. If you start a documentary and you end a documentary and none of your subjects, none of your characters have transformed before the audience's eyes, who's sticking around for that? I think we are all after these narrative arcs in our own story and narratives we're drawn to. And so that's really what I look for. So if it's a White House centered story, I'm looking for okay, who came up with this particular policy? In what back room did this sort of come together? How do I figure out those accounts? How do I get close to those people to either get it directly from them or get it directly from their people?
It's so interesting because you're kind of leading into my children's time here in a little bit that we're going to have during worship, because I talk about Encanto. I'm going to talk about Encanto. Have you seen Encanto yet?
I have a 3-year-old, so I have no excuse. Yeah, I know.
I'll forgive you. Okay. But I think the characters are just so rich in this, and they do a great job of it. And I think it really does enhance it. And so, I'm going to talk about how in fiction, we can really insert ourselves into the narrative, right? Like we find ourselves as one of those characters. But you're right. The reality is even if it's a documentary or something that's true in life, that's what makes it so compelling, is how it triggers us, right? And how we relate with those characters or don't. And so, I'm curious, like what?
I know. I'm sort of fixated on process. Like everyone's got their process. You wake up every morning, you've got your process. Some of us write. A lot of creatives do. I do something called pages. I wake up every morning and I just freehand write 3 pages, which is kind of just a thing I do. One sort of
Hold on, stop right there. I want to know why. Like, one, how did you get to that? Like, what inspired you to start writing 3 pages every morning?
So there is this book called The Artist's Way that introduces the concept, and it came out, do not quote me on the date, but It came out several decades back, and it has been kind of a resource for a lot of Hollywood writers, fiction writers, a number of creative folks who are looking to just kind of push through those mental blocks that I think we all kind of find that are either just the errands in our day or the things that are worrying us. It allows you to just sort of like cleanse the palate and everything off your mind. And then I find that it really helps me come up with creative ideas. Once I just kind of write down everything.
I love that. And
got to do 3 pages. First thing, you do nothing. You can't have coffee before you got to do it. It's the first.
That's painful. Why would you torture yourself in such a way? And is there any like prompt that you go with, or is it just these are the first things that are on my head kind of thing?
Sort of the first things, or sometimes it's often when I'm in a project or I'm thinking about a project, right? Or I've just finished a project or I'm struggling with a project and I'm thinking, it's a simple question of like, how am I feeling today? What is today feeling like? And so maybe I'm struggling with how to make a particular scene interesting, how to find a kind of interesting turn in a narrative. Am I focused on the right things? It's just kind of a way to kind of release all of those worries literally onto the page. And you shouldn't reread it. It's really just for the purpose of the exercise. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you ever go back and reread them and think, what in the world was I thinking? Never?
My handwriting's so bad, I can't, which is great. I'm sort of curious to, I've been doing it for a few years now, right? So I'm curious now to go back years later and think like, wow, what was worrying me about that particular project? Once you win awards and other things, it's characterized as like, oh, that was a huge success. But I think we all know, like when you're in the thick of things, it doesn't feel that way.
I would tell you, as a pastor and loose theologian, I will say when I go back and read sermons from 10 years ago, I think, oh my God, I thought that then? Like, what was... And I was communicating that to people, so I guess that's part of my character evolution, right? I'm continuing to progress. I love that idea, though, and I want you to maybe, if you can, elaborate a little bit more on, like, how do you think of yourself as a character?
Ooh, that's a great question. Oh my goodness. As journalists, because I consider myself more of a journalist than a documentarian. Those are kind of different categories sometimes, right? Like, and we all watch Netflix and other things, and we watch the news, and there is a big difference. But I do I'm a hybrid between those two worlds, and so I guess I still think of myself as the journalist and the observer. I'm hanging back, I'm reading the room, I'm a fly on the wall. I'm trying to translate pretty complex ideas for a mass audience because I want people to feel like these issues are accessible, these people are accessible. So I sort of think of myself as sort of a bystander, an observer, and a translator. That's sort of, that's what I feel. And it's part of the reason I am bummed out, and I think a lot of political reporters are bummed out lately, is that it's a hard time to do that without appearing to be a threat, right? I think there's just an immense distrust for our field and for others, and it's just a tricky time. And I've always covered, stories right down the middle. I'm not part of partisan news or op-eds or any of that world, and I avoid including those interview subjects in my pieces. And so that's hard in a world in which we're trying to separate people into boxes,
And what, like, you talked about trust a minute ago, and that's kind of what's, I think, driving you a little bit now, it sounds like. What got you into this? Like, what made you decide this is the direction you wanted to go with your career? And, like, it seems pretty life-consuming, so...
Yeah, it's pretty life-consuming. I mean, it really is a vocation. I think about that a lot now, especially when stories are really hard to tell, or there's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't, and you're going up against big forces. You have to tap into something deeper, and it can't be as simple as like, well, this is my job, and I wake up and I do it from 8 to 5. It's something more meaningful, which is shedding light on some dark corners and trying to hold truth to power. I really do fundamentally believe. I know. But accountability is something that is in my blood. It really is, and I don't think I'm immune to it either. I mean, I think it's uncomfortable, of course, to feel that criticism when all I do, myself, when all I do is like kind of project that on other subjects. But but that is, I think, the value of the work I'm doing, because I also feel like I'm a representative of a much larger audience. And the short answer of how I got into this is I was watching a news program in college, and I just thought, I could do this. Like, I could do this better than what was kind of a lame Sunday morning talk, political news show on a national network. And it was wild to think that. I was 19. I mean, it just made no sense, but I, for some reason, just felt like I understood the issue they were talking about at the time, and it didn't feel like the congressman on camera did. And I was like, they're not reading these bills. And it turns out like they're not, which I didn't know. And so, yeah, totally. And so I just kind of applied for an internship and slowly made my way over to political news. I mean, it took a really long time. It took a really long time to cover what I wanted. I think so. I'm a little on the fence at the moment just because it's a really intense time. And I guess I'm sort of thinking a lot more about like programming that helps build up democracy as opposed to tearing it down. And I don't mean, and I mean that from like an all sides perspective. Like if we continue to do really aggressive reporting about Congress and no one has any trust left in these systems, then like where do we continue to, like, where do we go from there? So I'm thinking sort of those bigger questions at the moment.
That's a big question, and you're absolutely right. Like, you want to hold accountability and be a truth teller, but you also want people to trust the systems that are put in place to keep our democracy moving.
Yeah, and it's tricky.
Yeah, if you don't, though, then it's going to run wheels off, as we've seen in other places. Well, and in our own country, too. Okay, yeah. Digress. I really want to know what characters inspire you, and those can be real life characters, like as we've been talking about, it could be real people, or fictional characters as well.
Oh man, great question. Jeez, who inspires me? Yeah, I mean, I love fiction. That is where when I'm on the road covering all of these subjects we're talking about covering, the thing I do when I go back to my hotel is I just read fiction. I just adore it. So I love it's funny, I'm not going to give you like a specific name, but
It's okay.
I love Zadie Smith. I love her writing. I love I'm a little addicted to certain genres. Like I love the young immigrant American experience desperately, because I think it just reminds us all of like what is so uniquely special about this country. And I feel like those stories always give me a lot of perspective when I'm covering Washington. Yeah. There's a playwright and a writer named Ayat Akhtar, who I just also adore. I don't know. Fiction is like the first place I go for like inspiration, and some of that is also just like beautiful writing, right? Like sure. When you read beautiful prose, it just does tap into something deeper in you. And then I will say I really do. It's funny. I'm taking a class here with a professor who's also a reporter, David Sanger, at the New York Times, and he has worked the cybersecurity, foreign security beat for 38 years, and I just think anyone that is paying that close attention to news for, going on a fourth decade is really doing a certain, just a real public service. And so I guess I really respect the journalists that have just kept their eyes in the right places for the rest of us. That's another place I go.
That's really good. I think that's one thing that I've learned a lot over the last couple of years too, is that fiction can really help. One, it helps a little bit of an escape, like you were talking about, but also it helps me to open my eyes and see the world in a whole new way.
Totally. And it's so relatable, and I think it helps you it's like a hug sometimes. Like I'm reading Joan Didion right now, and I'm rereading Slouching Towards Bethlehem, and it's just, I don't know, there's something about that feels timeless. Yeah.
I'm rereading, I watched the movie, I'm reading Ready Player One, which feels a little bit too close to home at this point right now.
Yeah, like everyone's watching Station 11, right? Like I just adored that book when it came out. I have not watched the show because I don't know if I'm ready for it yet, but like I've thought a lot about it over the last, 2 years, because it was fiction that just really stayed with you in such an incredible way. Octavia Butler is also like a African-American sci-fi writer who just is so gifted and talented, wrote similarly in the sense of like kind of post-apocalyptic stuff. And anyway, it's fun to dip into weird things like that.
Well, once you watch, I think I said Encanto earlier. That's my terrible Spanish. Encanto, right? Once you watch it, you'll have to let me know what your favorite character is, because I think the characters are just fantastic, and they do such a fun thing with the. Have you at least listened to the music? Have you heard any of it?
I've heard the music, yeah.
Okay.
And here you are asking about characters, and I went to like people creating
It's
characters.
okay.
I didn't do characters, but I guess I don't know. I'm just in awe of people who craft stories, bottom line, fictional or non-fictional. And I guess I technically do that now.
You 100% do, yeah.
It is just, it is really just it's a beautiful gift. Yeah.
Okay, if you could write a fiction book, what would it be about?
Ugh.
It's a different genre for you, so.
Totally different. Golly. I went to college with Mitchell at this little college in Arkansas that was just in the middle of nowhere and was a total leap of faith. And it ended up being the best decision in the world for me. And so I just love kind of fish out of water narratives. And I was a total fish out of water. And the world just opened up to me there. And so I think that kind of timeline for a lot of people, kind of when we first leave home, is just something that's just, anyway, incredibly special. So I don't know. I'm interested in that time. And going through that.
I love that. So if people want to find you and the work that you do, where's the best place for them to go?
Oh my goodness. Watch PBS Frontline. We just have done 20 documentaries in the last 5 years. Yeah. So they're all streamable and available anywhere. That's the spot to go.
Okay. Well, they'll go look you up and find you and see your incredible reporting that you're doing. Hey, thanks so much for taking some time to be with us this morning and for sharing your story a little bit here, and continuing to create really good stories for us. And we hope that you continue to build trust for journalism and as well as for White House and all of our political realms. We're really grateful for you and all that you do. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you. This was great.
Everyone, we'll be back in just a few minutes for worship, so don't go too far. We'll be back in, I think, 8 minutes, maybe 7. Come on back.